All right, yeah, welcome back. Today's our last day of Unit 3, Day 12. Reminders to have had your history notebook, and make sure you're taking notes as you move through the video, and make sure you complete the vocabulary for this video. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So our key terms for the day are Tokugawa Shogunate, Matthew Perry, the Meiji Restoration, Zaibatsus, and the 1889 Constitution. So our key concepts is the weakness of the shogunate and the reasons for its fall, the impact of the Meiji Restoration, political, economic, and socially, and Japan's foreign policy at the turn of the century. So during this time, Japan will expand, and we're going to talk about how they expand and why they expand. So Japan changes is unique because it changes without really a massive revolution. During the late Tokugawa Shogunate, which utilized a centralized bureaucracy, they had combined alliances with the feudal magnates or the daimyos. The government was chronically short of funds, though, due to the lack of trading, outside trading. This weakened the shogunate and made it vulnerable to external threats. Right? Within government and society, political alliances between the bureaucracy and the samurai worked very well. The growth of Neo-Confucianism made Chinese life more secular, meaning not very religious. Literacy rates in Japan were much higher than that in the West due to national schooling, which emphasized Japanese culture, and the Dutch study schools, which represented attempts to learn Western science and technology. All of these things lead to a much more educated and much more ready for change Japan. Now, 1853, the challenge to Japan's isolationism will come from an American Commodore, Matthew Perry. And basically, he demanded that Japan open itself to trade. And basically, they said, if you do not open yourself to trade, we will bomb and from our ships your ports and cities. Well, since Japan never really adopted Western technology, they can't fight that. Right? And the shogun immediately faced opposition because the shogun has to answer. Right? Well, the shogun and the daimyos both made appeals to the emperor, and the emperor began to emerge as a more powerful figure. Ultimately, Japan will open to the West, really open to the United States, and this leads to the Meiji Restoration, Meiji being the emperor. And in the 1860s, Japan samurai armed with Western weaponries will defeat the shogun's army. And in 1868, certain samurai will restore imperial rule under the Meiji emperor. Now let's talk about the Meiji Restoration. This is when the Meiji government will abolish feudalism. They will replace the daimyos with regional prefectures. The government will send samurai abroad to Europe and the United States to study political, economic, and military organization. They will create a new conscript professional army. By 1884, the government will create a new nobility to staff a House of Peers. The civil service examinations were then utilized to open bureaucracy to men of talent. This really comes from Chinese systems. By the 1889, they have created a constitution which recognized the supremacy of the emperor. It did give limited powers to an elected lower house representatives within the government. Voting rights were determined by property qualifications. Only 5% of the population were able to cast ballots, and new political parties develop. Due to the inclusion of businessmen among the political elite, this was a major difference from Russia's model of reform, and this allows Japan to become far more successful due to the inclusion of businessmen who can advocate for their businesses. Now, Japan's Industrial Revolution was mainly enacted to modernize the armed forces. The modernization was necessary for military reasons and basically was the foundation for industrialization. That internal infrastructure was created, guilds and internal tariffs between states were abolished. And the government would actually provide direct capital loans to help businesses get started with industrialization. Uh, Businesses such as Mitsubishi um, were given loans from the government to begin uh, that start of industrialization. The government will also build model factories to provide experience with new technologies. So it's like a school to learn how to work in a factory. Private enterprise soon joined government incentives, particularly in textiles. This also creates industrial combines, or Zaibatsus, which serve to accumulate capital for major investments. So, as an industrial combine is many businesses coming together to create an industry or a corporation. What are the results of this? Japan's careful management of industrialization, limited foreign involvement, so that means more of their money stays in Japan. But Japan, being an island, doesn't have a lot of natural resources, such as coal and resources to make goods. So Japan has to continue to depend on the importation of equipment and raw materials from the West. More than Russia, Japan's industrialization depended on selling manufactured goods abroad. But since there's lack of foreign investors and most of their factories are owned by Japan themselves, they can keep a lot more of that money. Now, what are some of the effects of industrialization? Social change led to rapid population growth. This puts a strain on Japanese resources. Patriarchal households remain the norm, but divorce rates indicated an increase in instability within family life. Again, we talked about the education system stressing science and loyalty to the emperor. But there is more Western influence due to trade. So Western culture arrived with models of state like government structure and industrialization. Now, foreign policy, Japan entered the race for colonial domination extremely late. Japan will annex the Ryukyu Islands. Also, we talked about the Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, which Japan will wipe the floor with both Russia and China. And these victories yielded Japan some territories, northern China, Taiwan, and by 1910 they will annex all of Korea. Of course, they're going to have very favorable treaties with Russia and China to stop. So it's just this big. Remember, most of their industrialization is based on military growth. Now, some of the strains of modernization. Industrialization and successful imperialism has cost. Industrialization upended older traditions and social classes, and imperialism demanded a strong industrial base, meaning that you had to keep this industry going or you could not stop imperialism. Now, this also leads to a rise of nationalism. Conservatives were appalled at the trend to imitate the West. They wanted to maintain their Japanese values. Leaders urged loyalty to the emperor and to the nation, and nationalism becomes a strong force in Japanese politics and will remain an extremely large force in Japanese politics through World War II, and even so you can still see some remnants of it today. So again, some big takeaways from this. Japan was way more successful than Russia and China at industrialization. They allowed goods and services and goods and ideas in very controlled, and also the government was extremely supportive in those endeavors, thus allowing them to become more successful. So that's all I have for this unit. Thank you guys. I'll see you guys in class, but this is the end of unit. This is the modern era. We'll move into the contemporary next or soon.